board members, we will now convene for our final interview. Good afternoon, Dr. Vitti.
Good afternoon.
Thank you for coming back to visit with us on our, we're on our last leg, board members, of our interviews. And Dr. Vitti, the way that the process will be handled today is that we will allow you an opportunity to give an opening statement, and each board member will then ask questions, and it will start with board member Phil Lee, and then we'll save about 15 minutes and allow you to ask any questions that you might have and to give a closing statement. Sure. So we will start with your opening statement, and then we'll start with Mr. Lee.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I was usually customary for you to ask me how I'm doing. I should ask you how you all are doing. After yesterday, we had a grueling 6-hour process. Now you have yours. But with that said, I want to thank the staff ahead of time, Bonnie, Michelle, Jill. They have been great with just making me feel comfortable. My wife is here with me this time around, which has been a great experience. The city of Jacksonville has been great to both of us, feel very comfortable here. And again, thank you for selecting me as a finalist. With that said, I did pass out to you just during the course of the final interview just a packet that explains things that you've already seen, resume. You also have a tab here on the strategic plan with the 6 goals and an outline of strategies, initiatives that would be aligned to each of the goals based on feedback that I've heard from the envisioning committee, based on just researching the district in general, knowing what I do know about Duval, then a summary of my data, a 100-day plan, which you have seen before, and something that I called PRIDE, which is partnerships reaching to improve Duval education. And then the last tab is STAR, Student Teacher Administrative Resources, which is just an outline of each of the different stakeholders and some initiatives, ideas to take Duval good from great. I'd like to open, aside from that, to just say, I know that a lot of talk has been made about experience. And what I'd like the board to think about is not the years of experience, the time doing the job, but instead look at experience in a way that actually distinguishes myself from the other candidates. In looking at particular track record and what has been done in the age of accountability. When looking at the 3 candidates, I can say that I am the only one that in the age of accountability has been a teacher, a principal, a district administrator, and a state administrator. I have been one that specifically has led principals through this difficult, rigorous, and constantly changing accountability system. And with that said, my experiences, I believe, position me to have the credibility and the legitimacy to work with every important implementer in this system, from the teacher to the principal to the state administrator, with a sense of courage, boldness, and authenticity in having navigated this difficult Florida system. And I think that's extremely important based on where Duval is right now. There's a lot of talk about morale, about someone that will stand up and understand and who gets it. People are looking for a leader that has walked in their shoes. And I have walked in their shoes in the era of accountability in Florida. And that's extremely important because a lot of the morale issues are linked to an accountability system, a government structure in Tallahassee that does not get it often. And you need someone who can negotiate proactively with Tallahassee to create better policy, to prevent bad policy from happening, and that can walk shoulder to shoulder with teachers, with parents, and navigate this accountability in the weeds, in the daily weeds with stakeholders, and not from a rhetorical framework, but someone who has done it, who has walked the talk, and someone that will inspire people on a day-to-day basis by modeling what needs to happen and not talking about it. So thank you.
Dr. Vitti, thank you again for being here and going through this, I know, a very long process. So I want to start with a financial question. I think the board would like to get a better understanding of how, if you were to become superintendent, how we're going to deal with what I perceive as a looming threat to a lot of our progress. I think in the next 12 to 24 months, we're going to hit a real financial cliff, or go off the financial cliff, hit the wall, whatever way you want to describe it. I don't think Duval's unique in that in Florida. You probably are dealing with it in your area also. So we're trying to get a better understanding of when you take into account a class size amendment, human resources are the largest spigot. How are we going to be successful? I mean, we're running out of money. We've just since I've sat on the board, we've cut a large amount of money out of here. The board before us cut even larger amounts, and we're getting to a point where we're gonna have some difficulties here. Mm-hmm. So, give us your vision of how you're going to help the board be successful with that.
Thank you. I think it starts with experience doing it. So in Miami, over the past 2 years, we've had to face a $1 billion cutting process. And we've done that by continuing to raise student achievement. So I actually believe that through budget cuts and the necessity to do that comes an opportunity for efficiency and therefore innovation. And that has happened in Miami. Specifically to Duval, when you look at the budget, there are some opportunities, I believe, when you look at it. For instance, it seems as if there's about $100 to $110 million that is there as a carryover as the years before, and looking at how will we spend that money, I think we should look at it in a non-reoccurring way. Something that we can invest in the infrastructure, whether it be technology or capital in some way. I also look at the budget and I see that as a total dollar amount in Duval, spending almost as much in Dade for administrative costs. There's a lot of duplication at the central office level, trickling down into the cluster level that I think can be eliminated, streamlined to create greater efficiency. I think that the district stands at a great place as far as debt, very little debt, borrowing very little, which puts us in a good position. Our reserves are in good place. I also think there's an opportunity to look at how we're using general revenue for professional development. Looking at the budget, there's about $25 million that's being spent on professional development. That's an awful lot, again, vis-a-vis Miami, where we're spending almost about maybe 2.5 in general revenue in professional development. So the question becomes, how can we maximize federal funding, whether it be Title I, Title II in particular, in avoiding a supplement and supplant issue, but streamlining, again, the professional development to focus on the particular population of teachers that serve those students. Those are just some examples. I know that there have been studies that indicate that if we close our low enrollment schools, especially elementaries, we could save up to $20 million. I'm not ready to say we should go ahead and close schools. I don't believe in that. I think we have to offer the community a solid academic program or opportunities above and beyond closing schools, and offering something and an enhancement of what's currently there. But all scenarios that lead to opportunities in my mind. And lastly, we need to press Tallahassee hard to fund public education the way it should be funded. And I've worked with possibly the best superintendent in this area, Alberto Carvalho. There's no one that touches him and his track record with knowing Tallahassee in and out. And I believe if given the opportunity to be superintendent here, we share many of the same contacts and networks and resources so that we can be true partners from the south to the north in making sure that we're funded the way we should be. And that's something that I have done, and I will certainly do even more as superintendent in Duval.
You're welcome, Dr. Vitti. The question I've asked others, and I want to make sure that we get the same question to all of you, and that is about you've been vetted, everyone's been vetted, some more than others they think, but more importantly is that because they've been a sitting superintendent, but what have you seen with all in the last couple of months since you've been in this process? What changes have you seen? And I know you've been to Duval County oftentimes in your work, but what have you seen that you've learned perhaps that you didn't know when you first started coming here that you thought you knew, and what have you seen different that you would like to address?
I had heard about the level of civic awareness and involvement that made Jacksonville unique, but I have been more than impressed with the level of civic engagement from the business community, from the nonprofit, from parents to teachers, and to me, there's no better opportunity than to leverage all of that to go from good to great and to become a national model for public education. I think most urban superintendents struggle to try to captivate nonprofit business entities and just stakeholders in general outside of those that are employed by the district. And here, it's people are banging on the door demanding for excellence, and they want to put their shoulder to the wheel. I think the challenge is how do you organize all of that will, all of those resources within the strategic plan, hold it accountable, and ensure that things are not replicated, that things are not duplicated, and that everyone stays in their lane but is very focused on driving that goal in the strategic plan and developing results. So that is what has surprised me. And the other thing that it's been great to see is as I meet teachers, parents, more teachers and administrators at the school level and at the district level, there's a genuine desire for someone that gets it. And it goes back to what I said in the opening. They're hungry for someone that understands the day-to-day challenges that they face, and someone that can come in and listen, but come in with concrete solutions and strategies so that it validates their work and it inspires them to do more than what they're currently doing, because there's an untapped potential here of certain individuals and groups that are hungry for change, that are hungry to take this to the next level. It's about finding the leader that will cultivate that will inspire that will grow that, so that they can maximize what they believe and what I have seen as that potential.
Dr. Vitti, thank you so much for being part of this process. I know it's been very intense, but this board wanted to do due diligence for our candidates because this is the most important job that we have. My question actually kind of piggybacks on Board Member Hazuri's. There are multiple programs and partners, all with good hearts and some with money, that are invested in our district. How would you ensure these groups don't overstep their bounds in relating to the school district and your authority as the education leader of this district? And what actions would you take to regain authority or control where management has lost its influence in this district?
Sure, and this is something that I had to do in Miami as well. Working with 26 of the lowest performing schools in Miami, most of the nonprofits were most interested in working with these schools. And as you said, more times than not, their heart is in the right place, but the strategy is not there always. And so sometimes it's having the courage to say no. So that's something that I would definitely have to do here. But more importantly, it goes back to the answer to Tommy's question, which is to be very explicit with what is the strategic plan. Again, these 6 goals are the right goals for our district. It's taking those goals and being very specific with what are the strategies, initiatives that will drive those goals to ensure performance. And it's learning what each of those nonprofits and other entities have to offer as far as resources, strategies, and align that, very concretely align it, and being very clear with what are the funding gaps, what are the human capital gaps that they can fill, so that everyone, it's no different than creating a puzzle and finishing a puzzle. And they're all pieces that need to be put together in precise alignment, and then tracking it throughout the year, checking in with the implementation, literally project managing each and every one of those strategies, initiatives linked to the nonprofits, and asking the questions, a simple 3 questions. What's working, what's not, and what do we do differently? Many nonprofits become frustrated because there isn't commitment and engagement at the district level. It's just an add-on initiative. It's an add-on strategy. And to do it the right way, you have to fold it into the strategic plan and drive it. And as a superintendent, it's my role to clearly articulate where the gaps are financially and strategically, and to hold those nonprofits accountable to doing what they said they were going to do, and then making adjustments when it's not working or abandoning the initiative if the results aren't there.
I think just being specific to you, there's been a lot of talk, we see it, blogs, media, about you really, because you came from the state, you have some connections to certain individuals, that you may have more of an allegiance to them instead of Duval County Public Schools. Can you discuss that with us and talk about what,
Sure.
At what point do you say, this is my district, I'm the educational leader?
Sure. First off, my allegiance is to kids, no one else. The students of Duval County Public Schools. That is my focus. And to do right by kids, you need friends. You cannot do this alone. You need partnerships. You need people that are in influential positions. You need individuals that can garner resources to the district. But my number one priority is what's best for children. And I will make decisions and recommendations to the board that is solely focused on what's best for kids. And if it's not best for kids, then I won't do it, regardless of who or what organization or what entity is asking me to do something.
Welcome back.
Thank you.
One, I wanted to follow up a question regarding Mr. Lee's question, because you said we had a $100 to $110 million carryover. Could you explain that?
Sure. If you look at the budget this year as opposed to last year, there has been increases in materials and supplies and other areas in the general revenue that may look like they could be spent, but we could look at opportunities again to maximize those resources. And it's linked to the reserve, again, a 3%, but there's additional funds that could be used moving into this next year, and we will have to make a decision on how to use that funding strategically.
Yeah, I think it's the same thing we've been talking about the $100 million roll
Right.
forward.
Use some of that when we just did the budget? Yes. Yes. So that's what I was referring to. I know that we use some of that. Yes. So we do not have that amount. That was my question.
It appears as if it's budgeted. So.
Okay. I have a concern, Dr. Vitti, and my concern is that since your last visit, you've constantly emailed board members, and we have gone through great opportunities to ensure that we have a process. And the process was to meet with the candidates and decide and then come back with the candidates. And I've been a little, I'm feeling that you've kind of dishonored the process by constantly emailing us based upon what you've heard, as opposed to, like today, bringing your information today, as opposed to constantly emailing. And also, I've had some calls from some people on your behalf, and they have only called Ms. Burney and myself. And I didn't care for that, because I think that we are a board. It's 7 of us. And if people are going to call on behalf, they should call all of us, not just the African Americans on the board. So would you speak to how
Sure.
this process, is that something that, I feel that that would be a carryover. We are a board, it's one board, it's not 2 members or four members. So, and I expressed that, and perhaps they shared with you that I was very, I thought that they were, not respecting the entire board by just calling the
Sure.
2 of us.
Thank you for the opportunity to clarify that if that was a concern for you. To be clear, there were 2 instances where I emailed the board. One was regarding overall data, because there was a fear on my part that the individuals compiling the data were not clear with how the Florida accountability system has changed. And I thought it was important in the deep dive that the data that you were analyzing was an apples-to-apples comparison and not an apples-to-oranges. That was the first email, the very thorough data review and comprehensive collection of data. The second email was as a follow-up to what was published by the Times Union based on information that was provided by the district to all of you in the phase 1 of the deep dive, and then that was published. The only thing that spurred me to email you after that was that the data was inaccurate, clearly. And very specifically, in measuring my graduation rate, I assume it was the district, Duval County Public Schools, who went to the website and looked at the AYP graduation rate. And what was demonstrated was an increase, but it was actually not reflective of my data, in that the baseline data was the year before I came, and the first year was actually my baseline. So although it showed an increase, it was actually not reflecting the true increase or my data. Also, the reading and math data was reflective of 26 schools, and to do it accurately, you had to use 19 schools with the 2 years that were compared. So, and to me, it was about being transparent and and communicating with you openly with issues and concerns that I clearly saw with the information that was given to you, and I did not want the board to make judgments and assumptions on data that was inaccurate. And I thought it was my responsibility to do that, and that's why I emailed the board on those 2 instances. Regarding individuals calling, is I can't control those that have been fans of mine and that would like to see me become superintendent in Duval County Public Schools. And if you were taken aback by the phone calls, then I regret that, but I can say that I did not ask individuals to call you, to call Ms. Burney, or to call anyone on the board. Again, in this process, you have fans, you have advocates, and I think that's actually a good thing. And again, if you took offense to that, on their behalf, I apologize, but that I can't help people that want to advocate for me.
Data, the concern I have about the data is that when we asked for a comparison of not just your data but all 3 of the candidates, we could not get a true comparison because we did not have the individual student data. So I don't want anyone to leave here with the impression that the data was inaccurate. The data was based upon what was accessible. So my question to you is, in the information that you sent us,
Yes.
where you compared Duval County's data, if we can't get Miami's individual data, how did you get ours?
The data that I used for the comparison with data in Duval was AYP data, apples to oranges in reading, math, and graduation. By using AYP in the context of Florida, the accountability system is the same, and the way AYP is calculated, it's all students. So you are able to do an apples to apples comparison because it's AYP and the accountability system is the same in relation to the Duval-Dade comparison.
Because that's not the understanding. But and I'm not going to belabor the point in terms of the calls, because I know what the person's call told me. They said that you asked that they call, and to call Ms. Burney and I. And so I want to make it clear, we are board, we are one board. And that's important that all of the candidates understand that. And then you mentioned about the $1 billion cut that Miami did. Since you were over 26 schools, what role did you have in cutting, in terms of the budget? Do you have a specific role in cutting that $1 billion, or was that a superintendent decision?
Well, obviously, the superintendent makes the final call on those issues, but the superintendent created a committee of senior cabinet members, about 6 of us, that would thoroughly review the budget along with the chief operating officer, the chief financial officer, and to review the budget each year during the time in which decisions had to be made. And that committee had to give concrete strategies to cut the budget. So on that small committee representing the 4th largest district in the country, we had to offer difficult strategies in order to balance the budget. So did I actually implement the cut? No, but I was directly involved with the decision-making process, which certainly can carry over into being in the hot chair.
Dr. V, my question is about the board-superintendent relationship. If you are selected to be the superintendent, you obviously will be working with 7 board members. Would you kind of describe the relationship that you see, and what would you do if you found a member or members micromanaging?
We'd have to have a conversation about it. I respect the role of the board. The role of the board is to constantly represent the interests of their constituency. And the board is best positioned in many ways to do that, by getting out there, by talking to parents, talking to students, talking to a number of stakeholders, and in bringing that to the collective board to advise and make recommendations to the superintendent. But there should be respect between the board and the superintendent, that the superintendent is ultimately the CEO of the organization, that the superintendent has to make difficult personnel decisions and budget decisions, and that has to be respected. So that's why you have a superintendent. And so when there are instances where I feel that the board is micromanaging, I would have an individual conversation with that board member, explain where I was coming from, and hopefully we get to a point of understanding, and that the board in general talks about and reinforces the notion that the superintendent is the CEO and that the board is the board, and that it's a constant negotiation, because we all want what's best for kids. And so if we all remind ourselves of that, and we all make the necessary compromises when necessary, and we build trust, and we communicate with one another, it can happen. I've seen it, I mean, very, very specifically in Miami. We were, the superintendent took a board 4 years ago that was very divided, and now it is a unified, it has a common vision, and we don't always agree, the board doesn't always agree, but there is a unifying vision and understanding between the board and the superintendent.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Dr. Vitti. First, let me say that I appreciate your very professional approach to this job and your enthusiasm. No one else has given us this sort of thing, or what you came to us with the first time. And I understand from talking with Mr. Blanton that I think he may have approached you about an opening somewhere else, and you indicated you're interested in Duval. So I mean, I appreciate your creativity, your initiative, your very clear interest in being our superintendent and showing the sort of initiative that I would hope we would have in a superintendent. And I also want to say to you, I've gotten many calls, not only about you, but about the other candidates. I appreciate those as part of the process, and it's my understanding, Ms. Wright, that calls haven't been limited just to a few members. I think we all have gotten many, many, many calls, and I, on a personal level, I'm glad to get them, and most of them about you have been very positive. They've always told us what they perceive as the limitations, and so I appreciate that input as well. My question to you is, knowing you're, obviously with Common Core, we're going to have some changes, hopefully, to this high-stakes testing methodology, but we still have it. And I want to ask you, what do you see as any of the drawbacks to this high-stakes testing system we have in the state of Florida? And if you perceive that there are drawbacks from an educational standpoint, what do you do or what do you propose to do to try to deal with any of the perceived educational problems that may be created by high-stakes testing?
Sure. Well, specifically the Common Core, I think Florida in general, Duval and every county in Florida is well positioned for Common Core. With the next generation of Sunshine State standards, we have in many ways in Florida set the bar with the type of rigor and expectations that are going to be a part of the Common Core. And we've had individuals throughout Florida influence the development of the Common Core. So as a whole, we will benefit from 10 years of FCAT, and then the next generation, I think our students will benefit from that type of rigor. The challenge is that with a constant evolving of the expectations and the way excellence is defined is frustrating in that the target continues to move, the bullseye continues to move. So it's very hard to track improvement when we go from old standards to new standards to Common Core. So as you work harder and you work differently, it's very hard to track that. So that's certainly a challenge. But as far as where we stand, and I would say this in Duval and throughout Florida, is our teachers, again, because of the rigor of FCAT and the new standards, they're well positioned, more so than most states throughout this country, maybe Texas included because of their assessment system. But specifically, in my role, what we have done is been very specific at the primary level to ensure that the Common Core is being implemented now and training teachers to do that. We've also, a lot of the strategies and initiatives that we've embedded with how we've trained teachers has prepared teachers for the Common Core specifically. More writing, certainly more writing, more discussion of text, walking away from textbooks and focusing on informational text, forcing students to argue and debate and discuss text. And more than anything else, the application of information and not just basic skills testing. So I have a very, and I think thorough understanding of what the Common Cores will ask us to do and ask kids to do, but with very explicit experience with developing the training that teachers will need to go to the next level. But all in all, I feel good with where we are as a whole in Florida, and with a specific experience on how to prepare teachers. But the frustrating point is a constant moving bar and being able to track how we've improved each year.
Dr. Vitti, as you're aware, the board did an extensive vetting process by having individuals to contact each of the districts to gain information. And I basically went through to look at some things that just jumped out at me as a board member that would raise some concerns for me and some questions. And one of the areas was with regards to school climate surveys. And I just want to share one thing with you just to get your perspective on it. This is with regards to Miami-Dade and the schools that you were particularly involved with. And in that, there was a climate survey. So with regards to the overall school grade, and this is from staff, It went from a C to a C minus. With regards to students, and the question was whether or not students felt that they were getting a good education at the school, and it was at the C level. With regards to having that small amount of schools, what do you attribute to that, and how will you, going forward as superintendent of Duval County Public Schools, ensure that with the diversity of schools that we have, that we improve that?
So could you point me in the direction of the data you're referring to?
Yes, this information.
So what I have staff, parents, and students overall school grade, right?
Staff, parents, and students, this is under school climate survey grouping, 9, 09, 10, and this is overall school grade, right?
And did you reference elementary?
I referenced high school.
High school. Okay. So what I'm looking at, and you said students, correct?
First with staff.
Staff.
For the high school staff.
Okay, so what I'm looking at is overall school grade at the senior high school level. I have staff in 2010 as the baseline as a C minus, and then in 2012 I have a C plus.
I have 2010-11 a C, 2011-12 a C minus.
Okay, and then you were referring to students as well, correct?
Students, right, because that's been a concern of ours as a district with regards to school climate surveys, where the students sometimes differ from the parents.
Okay, and then I'm looking at 2010 for senior students, a C minus, and then in 2012 a C.
I have 2010-11 a C, 2011-12 a C. At any rate, the most important thing to me is the C.
Yeah.
That's average.
Sure.
What I want to find out is, with that small amount of schools, what do you think attributed to that? Because I would think that they would get more nurturing, they would get more of the closeness and the relationships that they would need in order to feel that way, and with regards to the teachers.
Right.
So talk to me basically about how you move this lever, especially in Duval County when we have a number of teachers across the board who are already feeling inundated, and it has to be, and just in my opinion, that this may have to do with the level of work that teachers have. So how are you going to be able to move that needle?
Right, and I think it was well said. A C is not good enough. I just wanted to clarify what you were looking at, what I was looking at. But I think when you look at the schools that I led, specifically the 10 ETO high schools at the student level, I think their frustration and representative of a C, which is average, is many of the things that I've talked about that we need to address and overcome, and we've started to do that in these schools in particular. And one is an over-reliance on FCAT. Students want they want genuine learning experiences beyond testing. And so we have, because of state requirements with remediation in reading and math, many of the students are not taking electives. They're not taking music. They're not taking art. They're not doing those type of things at the scale that they did 10 years ago. So we have combated that by going to a 4x4 schedule, which offers the elective class, the industry certification exams, the career academies, but limited. Usually students that need to take a reading and a math only have one elective. So I think this C is representative of the frustration of constantly being judged by a test and having to constantly be remediated. So based on what I'm seeing, what I'm looking at, there was an improvement, but certainly not to the extent that I'd like to see it, and that I think eventually we would get to as we continue to refine electives and course offerings that meet their needs. On the staff level, again, from what I'm looking at, there was a slight improvement from a C minus to a C plus, but still average. And with that said, I think you mentioned some of the frustration, and it's linked to FCAT as well, is that an entire education experience for both teachers and students has been built around a test. And teachers constantly feel the pressure, the burden of increasing test scores when they didn't get in necessarily the business of educating students to raise test scores. They got in the business of trying to inspire and promote thinking.
Okay.
So,
with that being said, the next piece that jumped out for me, I started out with all three candidates by looking at the graduation rate, looking at the dropout rate for each of those, and then I went back in as best I could through all the data that we had to see how it possibly got there. So when I looked at the dropout rate for your schools, and it was in 09-10, it showed 5.2% dropout rate. In 11-12, 4.6. So there was a slight decrease, but not a lot, which says that children are not staying in those schools to the tune of where, if it's only 26 schools, what it should be. And I understand with regards to the students having to be double blocked, I think that that is one of the most god-awful things that has ever happened to students, and it has to do with all of that differentiated accountability at the state. That
no, actually, Ms. Burney, it has to do with state requirements that require remediation for students that are below grade level.
I understand. You didn't let me finish. I think that a lot of it has to do with the differentiated accountability that was putting the grade on schools and such pressure on schools. But my most important question with regards to all of that is with regards to, we're looking at Duval. And Duval's dropout rate, 10-11, improved 2.2%. What will you do in Duval County Public Schools, and what did you do here to make sure that the dropout rate is steadily decreasing? What innovative programs, I know that in your schools, in the ETO schools, there are magnet programs, but most of these kids, and I'm just asking the question, can most of the kids even take the magnet? I thought that it was even geared towards only high-performance students. So if they're kept out right there, what can be done in order to make sure that we keep kids in school and not dropping out?
Thank you. Again, for clarification, if I heard you correctly, the dropout rate has decreased with the 10 schools that I've led.
By 0.6.
Right, and the graduation rate has increased in 1 year by 9 percentage points on average, and that's 10 high schools. That's Ribault, Raines, and Jackson, multiplied by 3, add 1. So those are tough schools, and in 1 year, a 9 percentage point increase, and then the following year, an additional 2 to 3, which is 12 percentage points. So I just want to make sure that we're clear with the data.
My question is...
yes, I know. I just wanted to clarify that because it sounded as if...
I am very clear with the data. The data is not a ding. The data is data.
Right.
And so I'm stating the data because I want to find out what would you do.
Sure. So what we did in Dade, which is certainly can be replicated here in Duval, which is owning the individual process or progress of each student. So at the high school level, it started with creating a data system that clearly indicated where students were with meeting their graduation requirements, credits, community service, and an important component of this is FCAT in 10th grade. If that student does not receive the required 10th grade score in reading and math, even if they have all their credits obtained, they are in jeopardy of not graduating. So we were very aggressive in knowing at an individual student level where every student was, and then injecting an intervention to ensure that they would meet that requirement by the time that they graduate in 12th grade. And that happened with 12th graders, mainly over the past couple of years, and trickling into the 11th grade as well. So specifically, if a student was not meeting their requirement in FCAT, we would certainly increase the remediation in FCAT, but abandon the FCAT when necessary to go to the ACT primarily, because students found much more buy-in with the ACT because it was also an opportunity to gain scholarships and college admittance. So that students are just tired of FCAT, and especially the students that were in my school. They've been told through FCAT that they're inferior, and through the ACT, they found it as a leverage point, as a way to catapult them in college. So that was some of the work with increasing the graduation that could certainly happen here. It also meant offering additional academic opportunities to keep them motivated and interested. So at the high school level, we created 3 different pathways for students, either AP, dual enrollment, or industry certification. And that goes back to the question earlier, how do you keep students engaged and involved? If you look at 11th and 12th graders in these 10 schools, 34% were taking dual enrollment classes. If you combine dual enrollment and AP, we had over 50% of 11th and 12th graders taking dual enrollment or AP. And for those students that we didn't feel were ready to take dual enrollment or AP, they were taking industry certification classes, so CTE. And when we started this work, there were 250 students that were taking industry certification exams. In 2 years, that number skyrocketed to 4,500. And we weren't just putting students in industry certification exams, they were passing. 250 students took the industry certification exam the baseline year, and only 38% passed. 2 years later, 4,500 students took exams, 68% passed. So it's creating multiple pathways for students to keep them engaged, energized, involved, but being very, very strategic about interventions to ensure graduation.
Just a final question on that. And with regards to the students in the ETO schools, are your magnet schools restricted to highest performers? If so, why? And then how do you feel about that?
No, of the 10 high schools, we didn't have an exclusive magnet of those groups. Some of those high schools had magnet programs. Like, for example, North Miami Senior has an IB magnet. Booker T. Washington has an engineering magnet. So the role of the magnet for us has been to try to capture and keep our highest performing students in the feeder pattern to go to that high school, where in the past they were opting to mega magnets, so pure magnets, or charters or high performing schools through No Child Left Behind transfers. So more than anything else, we were able to retain our higher performing students, but most of the students in the 10 high schools are not in an exclusive magnet.
Thank you. Dr. Vitti, before I ask a question, I just want to give you my editorial here, too. I appreciated the information that you sent, and, you know, we did get calls. I got calls from all over for everybody, all 3, and that doesn't bother me, and the emails are just the same to me as a telephone call. But what did, you know, concern me is that the information, I would have welcomed information from any of the candidates if they were correcting something, comparing one thing to another, apples to apples instead of the apples to oranges, is what apparently happened here. And I wanted our staff to look at it and review it to see if there's something in there that they couldn't get elsewhere that they could get from this information. So I thank you for sending it. I think it was helpful. If you want to elaborate more on the graduation rate down there, I think it speaks clearly what you said. But let me go to organization and personnel. I want to get, my deal today is not the data as much as what this county is going to look like under your administration over the next 6 months. I saw your first 100 days, and when you deal with your cabinet, when you appoint your personnel, when you have your organizational chart, I know you've touched on it some, but I think people fear, and I think they have this fear from all the candidates, but I think it's come out more with you that you're going to bring all these people up. And, you know, I'm not going to be here, but that doesn't concern me as much as we have the right people. I'd love to have our locals here, but for me as a governance person, my job, our job, is really to set policy, and hopefully there'll be personnel in place that will carry out that policy under the leadership of the superintendent. So what is your vision in the next 6 months, say, with your personnel? How will you address them? How will you change your cabinet? I'm not asking for names, and I'm not asking that you're going to bring how many people up here, but what does it look like? And also, what will your organization chart, if you can talk about it, look like?
Sure. First and foremost, I think it's important to have, we often talk about diversity. And diversity for me means many different things. It's not only about race, ethnicity, gender, but it's also about experiences. And so my goal is to develop a cabinet, to develop an organizational structure that's made up of people that are a combination of what I call insider outsiders. And that's part of the diversity, is that there are people here that are extremely talented, that have done great work, and they need to be tapped. They need to be continued to be empowered, or they need to be found, and they need to have additional responsibility. And they can offer a true assessment of what has worked and what hasn't over the past, since they've been in the system, and offer me a great perspective as someone coming from the outside of what has worked and what hasn't. So in no way would it, at the same time, you need outsiders. You need outsiders that have a fresh perspective of what has worked in other districts, in other situations. And as superintendent, I hope to create a culture where it's a give and take. It's a synergy of ideas, of experiences to give what kids deserve. And I don't think that can happen by just relying on insiders, and I certainly don't think it can happen on just relying on outsiders. So, and that process of evaluating and recruiting will be based on individuals that understand what's most important, which is teaching and learning. And do they have explicit experience in the classroom at some point in moving the needle in increasing student achievement? And that's really, with a few exceptions on the operational side, those are the kind of people you want, because every decision that they make will have an impact on what happens to a child in a school. And you need an organization that has that in mind in every decision you make. Every decision you make as a senior cabinet level should influence, and does at some point influence, what happens in the classroom. So that practitioner lens is important to me. As far as the organizational chart is concerned, I would look at having more people report directly to the superintendent. I envision anywhere from 10 to 12, and those individuals drive the work of each department. Going back to the budget question, I feel that there's a lot of duplication between what's happening on the academic side of the house in the district and what's happening in the clusters. And that's where you have, I think, to be direct, too many executive directors. You have too many, and it's not only a budget issue, it's also a coherence issue, is that you have individuals at the district level telling schools what to do, and then the clusters are telling people what to do, and they're not talking with the same voice, and it leads to a lot of frustration by principals and then therefore teachers. So that I would look to streamline that and create one voice on the academic side, aligning what's happening at the district with what's happening at the cluster level.
You have mentioned the FCAT quite a bit, and the teachers' frustration with us kind of teaching to the test of the FCAT, and I think that happens across the state of Florida. It's not exclusive to Duval County.
Correct.
But talking about Duval County, there are a lot of district assessments that are implemented, and I'm not certain how that is in Miami-Dade, but just looking at our testing calendar. As a superintendent, how will you try to boost morale by filtering through some of the district-led assessments that we do for data so that teachers can teach?
Yeah. Many of the assessments are required at the state level, and that's something that I have talked to the department about. I do believe in interim assessments. I believe in progress monitoring, because you don't want to wait till FCAT to say, wow, we had X amount of students that were non-proficient. And if you have a robust and aligned data system, you should be able to tell where kids are at throughout the course of the year. But it does get a bit ridiculous when you're spending more time testing than teaching. So I would look clearly, and I'm already aware of what's required and what's not. I would take a close look at what's happening in Duval, and again, based on conversation that I've had with teachers, with principals, with district administrators, the general feeling seems to be that it's gotten better over the years, but that there could be better alignment between the pacing guide, the assessments, and the data that's given through those interims as a predictor of how kids will do ultimately on the FCAT. There can be better alignment with that. And then therefore those assessments become more meaningful for the students and for the teachers. So very specifically, I would take a close look with the number of assessments here, and I know that there's quite a bit. I would eliminate anything that was not required immediately. And then go right to the source, go right to teachers, and ask, what does this look like for you? What can we streamline? What makes most sense for you? And then, as I have been doing, is engage in a conversation at the FDOE, State Board of Ed, to say, how can we make this assessment process meaningful for kids and students? Students and teachers. And that needs to happen, especially, and we're even going to find, and this goes back to WC's question around Common Core, is we're going to have all these different assessments, and everyone's going to want their own individual interim assessment to predict. And somehow we need to streamline and make very difficult decisions, but informed decisions. And I believe I'm well positioned to do that in knowing Florida's accountability system and the FCAT in and out and what's required at the state level and what isn't.
Dr. Vitti, but first let me address my colleagues, Mr. Gentry and Mr. Hazuri. Let's be realistic. We all receive calls, but when as an African American member of this board, the two African American members receive a message just for us to via the board office, would think we all would find that problematic, and I think that can speak to the heart of establishing a board and superintendent relationship. So I don't comment on what you all say. You say whatever you want to say, and I'm going to always speak the truth. And so I have a concern about that, because the message was very clear, and I don't know these people. So it was very clear that, and when I spoke to one particular person, that person told me, and I'll share with you the name later. I'm certain that she already told you, that I was told to call these two people. I have a problem with that, and I'm going to say it because I think that is what I need to say. But in terms of, you talked about on your possible areas of focus for new superintendency, it says restore the arts and authentic cultural experiences. With the existing budget restraints from Tallahassee, how do you plan to do that? And the second part is that you talked about your relationship with your current superintendent and your relationship at the state level. How has that relationship to this point helped in terms of the budget? We're still getting massive budget cuts. Mm-hmm. And so how have that relationship assisted with the budget climate that we find ourselves in right now, the state?
So to answer your first question, what we've been able to do in Miami is, again, look at the master schedule and look at a 4x4 more than anything else schedule, which allows for the remediation requirements to be fulfilled, but yet leave, usually, even for students that need to be remediated both in reading and math, an opportunity to still offer an elective. And then it's doing different things with positions in order to offer that music or art teacher that would, that position was funded in a different way. there's also an opportunity, especially in Title I schools, to do things creatively and through different grants that at the federal level that still allow specifically for the music and the arts to be taught. So I do believe where there's a will, there's a way. And with every problem comes a solution. It's not always easy, and sometimes it's taking something off the plate that was originally there that we thought was important, but maybe the arts and music is more important than what's currently on the plate. And those are the type of financial and strategic decisions that we would have to make. But at the end of the day, I think you would agree that and Ms. Burney spoke to this, is that our students are being killed literally academically because of this remediation issue, and they're not being able to utilize their natural talents and aspirations and interests because of the remediation factor. So like I said, it's being creative, it's taking other things off the plate. And to answer your second question, you're right. It hasn't necessarily come as far as lobbying Tallahassee for additional money, although we did have an overall increase in as far as state funding. It didn't mean much with the cuts previously, right? But a lot of that work, I think, has come more with reducing even more money that would have come. So without a voice to challenge the initial budget over the years, we could have seen even more cuts previously had we not been active at the Miami level and across the state. So although it didn't come with necessarily solid increase, it did come with protecting at the minimum what we had and avoiding other challenges. I can say, aside from the budget piece, very concretely on the accountability side, is driven by many people, I would say Miami, Duval, and Hillsborough, regarding the intervene status. And I think it was important in the role that the superintendent had, along with myself, in saying we believe in accountability. We believe that we should see increases in performance in our lower performing schools, but the options that you're giving us and the timeline that you're giving us for improvement is unrealistic. And so that's more on the accountability policy side, but on the financial side specifically, I think we prevented even more declines that were originally projected based on the original Tallahassee budgets.
Could you give me an example of in terms of how you eliminated some additional budget constraints? Because you've been out of Tallahassee, what, this is your third year? So we were in budget cuts then. So as an insider, what did you do, or, you know, in retrospect, what do you think you could have done to sound the alarm about the impact of less money into schools? And I still would like a more concrete response to restoring the arts. In light of our budget constraints, how do you plan to do that, other than, I mean...
Right, so very concretely, it's changing the master schedule to, again, go to 4 classrooms, more of a block schedule, which, well, not in all schools here in Duval. Some of it's 3 by 3, you have the skinny schedule, so it's also tweaking that schedule to go to a more 4 by 4 at the middle and high school level, which then offers students an additional elective even when needing to be remediated in reading and math. And then, again, looking at the big picture and seeing what is currently being funded as far as positions, and looking at, for example, very concretely, although people, again, taking something off the plate, are supplements. And revisiting that aspect at the teacher level to use funds differently to pay for an additional position that can be used for music, art, and that has been concretely done in Miami, and so that's a concrete example. To go back to your financial question, is that in regards to when I was in Tallahassee or in Miami? I wasn't sure of the question.
I was responding to what you said, because you said you would rally Tallahassee. So you were in Tallahassee. What did you do? Right. And now, for the last 3 years since you have been out of Tallahassee, what have you done? Because we as a district and as a state, we haven't seen a whole lot change in terms of budget?
Well, in Tallahassee, it was through the commissioner talking to the state board, and the state board usually took hard stances on the lack of funding from the state board level. So there was a lot of conversation with state board members to need to push the governor's office and the legislature on providing additional funding for public education. So those were the kind of conversations that took place in Tallahassee. At the district level, again, we didn't see increase. We saw increases this past year, but again, that all in all, it made up for lost funding in the years past, and it's minimizing the originally budgeted cuts that were going to take place.
Dr. Vitti, I'd like to ask about the early childhood learning, and first of all, what you think of it, and secondly, I know in Miami, I do believe you were very involved in it, so I'd like to know what you would do here in Jacksonville.
So in Miami, every one of the elementary schools that I led had a 4-year-old program. And half of the day was funded out of the traditional VPK funding that goes through the Early Learning Coalition, and the other half of the day was funded through District Title I dollars, so that we provided all students in high poverty schools with a full day 4-year-old experience. So that was very concrete. In addition, most recently we negotiated with the county to assume the responsibility of implementing Head Start, and that was from the infant toddler level all the way to 3- and 4-year-old program. That was about 130 units that were transferred from the county to the district. And what is the potential there, obviously, is for articulation. To ensure quality. Our data is clear that those students that participate in our VPK programs at the district level outperform students that go to the private providers or do not have a VPK experience, and that's tracked through the years. Our data is clear on that. So knowing that, we wanted to leverage the opportunity to own Head Start at the infant level so that we could control for quality and we can ensure articulation, which doesn't always happen well. And so in addition to that, we've shifted resources, literally, to the primary level. So looking at the school improvement grant funds, looking at Title I, you know that across the country, we are placing most of our funds in middle school and high school. And again, it's a difficult conversation of where you're going to get the most return on investment. And that has taken specifically in technology, providing even primary teachers with more technology materials and training. And being very intentional with the curriculum, which is high scope, and infusing that phonemic awareness instruction so that students are learning to think critically, interact with each other well, but also being very upfront and clear with making sure that they're learning their letters, their sounds, so that they can be effective later. But going forward in the work in Miami, and I would say in Duval, it's putting that at the centerpiece of what we do, because I think that the work needs to be long-term and short-term. And the long-term solution is, and where the achievement gap is narrowest, is at birth, and then the subsequent years. And that is an untapped opportunity. And if we get that right, a lot of the remediation issues that we deal with in 3rd grade and on will be alleviated. But it's difficult because you have to shift resources and focus, and that has not always been the case.
Following up on Ms. Barrett's question, as actually a board initiative here 3 years ago, we had the district identify our Title I schools where children were coming least prepared. And we, as a board, pushed forward, and the district adopted a program of putting pre-K programs in our most needy schools. And we now have a very strong literacy component in our schools, but also in the whole community. Statewide, the reading proficiency levels are abysmal. And so here in Duval, we have launched a reading initiative primarily focusing on K-3 and also involving summer school. One question to you is, you mentioned pre-K, but will you continue the priority being placed on early learning and literacy, and how would you go about maximizing assuring that our children become proficient readers?
In my work with school improvement and raising student achievement, it has become, and we always say this, and we always talk about it, but again, it goes back to resources, and there are difficult decisions and strategies that need to be implemented, but we do need to shift our focus to the early learning piece and being proactive with it. So up front, I think we have to become dynamic about how we recruit primary teachers. I'm giving very specific, and we don't talk like this, but oftentimes what I see in schools is that we have great primary teachers, and when they demonstrate effectiveness, we quickly move them to the accountability areas, 3, 4, 4th grade. So we need to have some type of commitment from teachers in the collective bargaining process with the union to say we need our best teachers to stay in the primary level when we increase training. So ensuring quality, looking to make sure that we're using the right curriculum, making sure that we have articulation between teachers, and so that the data is passed, concrete data and anecdotal data. I also think that this initiative has to involve parents. We have to become much more active with reaching out to parents and not waiting for them to come to us, but for us to go to them. And that means going to churches, going to hospitals, going to supermarkets, going to the dry clean. Everywhere there are parents, that's where we need to be. And there are different funding sources that exist within Title I that can be used for that, HIPPY and other examples. So being more proactive on the parent front. I've talked about the Parent Academy and training parents who don't know how to navigate the system but can naturally incorporate literacy in the home with the type of questions they ask, how they're reading this to students. So those are some of the examples, and the business community, again, is hungry to be involved. They already are involved in the campaign, but it's being more strategic on the academic side of how we leverage that. And it also goes back to a question Becky asked with data, is what data are we using in the primary level, aside from what's required at the state level, to ensure that we're actually using that data to provide interventions. Again, we do intervention in 3rd grade. I actually want to do intervention with our 4-year-old programs, and at the K level, if we do it right early, again, the gap is narrowest there, and we should be guaranteeing that students are ready to learn or read in 3rd grade despite challenges that they may bring to school.
Dr. Vitti, I want to ask a couple of follow-up questions. The first goes back to the structure you were talking about, trying to streamline the structure. I noticed on the organizational chart, actually I noticed it on all the candidates' charts, there's a chief of staff. So I guess I would be interested in knowing your thoughts on that for Duval, because we do not have a chief of staff right now. And I guess technically we don't have a deputy superintendent right now either. So I'd like to get your comments on that. So that's my first question.
Okay. I do believe in a chief of staff. I would be interested in having a chief of staff. I think the chief of staff allows the superintendent to organize the work a bit more efficiently. I think the chief of staff is someone who can interact with the board, then not just put that pressure on the superintendent, and someone that can organize, align the work of the various departments and look at it from another perspective. So yes, to answer your question directly on chief of staff, I would be interested in that. As far as the deputy superintendent, and right now I would tell you that I would not likely have a deputy superintendent.
This question goes back to, I guess, the budget question. We recently had a management oversight by our CIO. And she threw some pretty large numbers at us, somewhere in the range of probably $80 to $100 million, to basically meet the technology requirements, along with kind of get us out of this 5-year refresh cycle that we have. So the capital millage has been dropped from 2 to 1. 2 to 1.5. I think it's the same for you guys. We've been doing a lot of transfers to the tune of about, this year is probably going to be $48 million from capital into operating. So how are we going to solve this problem? Because it's getting ready to hit us. And as much as I'd like to think that our legislators are going to help us solve that, I still think it will behoove us to make sure we have a solution as Plan B.
Well, for starters, it goes back to the seemingly confusing issue on maybe some money being in the general revenue to address that issue, and revisiting in general how we're what the current budget looks like, and if there are sources of funding to attack the capital infrastructural issue. In addition to that, I think all districts are facing in Florida this issue of no PICO dollars, and it's going primarily to charter schools. We need to be very aggressive with confronting that issue, aggressively, not very aggressively. That is just purely unjust. Aside from that, I think it is probably inevitable, unless something changes with PICO, that we have to entertain an issue of a bond. Not now. I don't think we're ready. I would say in 2 years, we should be ready to engage the community in that type of situation based on the improvement that I believe will happen in our district, that already has happened, and continue to build the reputation of the district, the trust that the public has with the district, because our buildings are older. We will continue to lose FTE, meaning students, because of our buildings, and if dollars are being shifted to charter schools, you can only imagine that they will continue to recruit our students. So, and as you mentioned, the infrastructure is a huge issue with online testing. As we're moving in that direction, we can buy all the computers we want. But if we don't have the infrastructure to deal with that, the drops and the rest, there only will be computers that won't be able to be used. So it's looking at the current budget. I believe that there are areas that we can there are funds now that we can use to just touch the problem in a non-reoccurring way, and then look to a bond in a couple of years once we continue to build the confidence that people have in this city with public education.
Dr. Vitti, can you share with me how long you were in the classroom? How long did you teach?
Altogether, I believe it was 4 years. Okay. A combination of being in the classroom and being a quasi-administrator and being a head dean of students.
Okay, and how many years were you a principal?
1.
1. Okay. With regards to the budget, with your position in Miami, can you tell me your span of control and the amount of the budget that you control?
Going back to my initial experiences or my most recent?
Your ETO.
ETO. So in my most recent experience, it was about $120 million.
Okay.
That's a combination of general revenue, Title I, school improvement grant, outside grants.
Okay. And what was your span of control? How many reports or anything like that did you have? How many direct reports did you have?
In ETO, direct reports, including 26 principals, which directly reported to me, about 55 direct reports, 50 direct reports.
Okay. And were you a part of the superintendent's cabinet? I see that now that you are chief academic officer. You're a part of the superintendent.
Yes, I'm part of the senior cabinet now. I was as the assistant superintendent of ETO. I reported directly to the superintendent, and I was on the cabinet. And then back when I was the knowledge management officer for the district, I was also on the cabinet then. That was about 7 years ago. Since being in Dade, I have always functioned on the cabinet.
Okay. With regards to the when you were at the state, what size budget did you control, or did you control the budget while you were at the state?
About $1 billion.
You controlled $1 billion for?
Yes, I controlled $1 billion that was distributed through 21st Century Grants, Title I, and other federal programs.
And how many direct reports did you have?
As Deputy Chancellor, I had roughly direct reports, probably 10. Okay.
And then my final question for you is with regards to one of the biggest concerns that faced individuals, and this is from a report to the Duval County School Board for the superintendent search. This was from the Envisioning Committee and others. One of the things that they talked about was the need for someone who had the diverse experience, I'm not talking racial diversity, but diverse experience of dealing with a system as large as Duval County. I understand Miami's big system, but you're not the superintendent. How do you take what you've done with your 26 schools and compare that with how you will run a system as large as Duval County Public Schools?
Thank you. I think again, the key word is diverse experiences. So I've had the opportunity to work in a state like North Carolina as a teacher. I've been in the Bronx in New York City in a 4,000 student high school. I've been a principal in one of the lowest performing schools in the fourth largest district in the country. I've worked at the Department of Education, which is the belly of the beast in Florida, serving many children, thousands of students. Most recently, as you mentioned, ETO. And driving that and being on the cabinet. And I think it's important to note that in each of those experiences, other than when I began as a teacher, it required a reorganization. So beginning even in New York City, that was a 4,000 student high school that went to 4 separate schools. I was instrumental, I was part of that process. So that meant making difficult personnel issues. That meant dealing with serious political repercussions and issues. Going to the district level and working and looking at initiatives across the district didn't require much organization other than some tweaking at the cabinet level in alignment. But then going to a principalship that had, off the top of my head, at least 20 openings when I walked in, which needed restructuring. It's then going to the Florida Department of Education and restructuring an entire school improvement process, which meant dealing with personnel and budget issues. As a deputy chancellor, it meant reorganizing at least 5 or 6 bureaus with anywhere from 100 to 300 people. It's then going to Miami-Dade and having to reorganize a region vis-a-vis a district, and how do you streamline professional development, support, services, operations. And then most recently as chief academic officer, it's meant realigning the academic area completely in reading, math, science, social studies, career technical education. So in every one of those experiences, it meant difficult reorganization, difficult budget decisions, deciding who was the best talented to be on the team, recruiting individuals that understood and knew the work. So that brought a richness of challenges and opportunities, all of which I can say with complete confidence that every organization that I inherited, I left in a better place. And I certainly believe that if given the opportunity to serve as your superintendent, when this journey would be over, Duval County Public Schools would be in a better place than I assumed when taking responsibility.
Sort of answered that question, because one of our candidates had said that that we can't have anyone lead our district unless they've been seasoned and sealed in this work, and I think that was applicable to what you just said. And if you wanted to add to that, we've had 3 good candidates, you included. I'm talking about the 3 of you, very well qualified. Each of you come with a different portfolio. One taught a lot, one never taught, and at least on the elementary, high school, middle school level, and yourself, who taught for a few years and in several places. And you have one of the concerns that you hear from people that you've moved up really fast. I was looking at all the remarks from yesterday and some of the things, and I would hopefully that would be attributed to your abilities. And I don't look at you as climbing a ladder. I don't know what the superintendent down there feels about you coming or not coming. I haven't called them. I wanted to. I'm sure others have talked to them. But tell me, based on what is going on, you know, you're running for office. This is like running for office. I mean, I don't look at it any other way. Why you are better than the best of all of them?
Well,
or you should be elected, if you would.
To go back to what you mentioned earlier and what I said in the opening, it's not how long you've done something, it's what you've done when you've done it. And I think what I offer is someone that has walked in the shoes of teachers, of principals, of district administrators. And it's not, again, how long you've done it. It's that, you've done it, which distinguishes me from the other candidates. I have done it. I have been a teacher. I have been a principal in the era of accountability, where my job was on the line if I didn't produce. That is significant and meaningful. And so that being able to distinguish that in Florida is important, because, again, it goes back to that morale issue. People, in order to lead, you need to be able to connect with people. You need to be able to empathize and understand the challenges people have. And that's the only way you will inspire them to do more. And I believe that because of those experiences, although quick, there are genuine experiences that cannot be taken away or cannot be replicated. So that's one point. The other point is to speak to the issue of moving up quickly. When I began as a teacher, I had no aspiration to be a superintendent. I actually didn't like superintendents or administrators, for that fact. I loved being a teacher. The only reason I became a teacher is because I saw what my kids did in my classroom, and I would walk the hall sometimes or look at a suspension list, and I would say, how in the world how is he suspended, and why is he throwing paper when I go by the classroom, and him acting up? And it became a mission of mine to try to replicate what I was doing in my classroom across all classrooms. And that then became why I wanted to be a principal. And then it became why I wanted to be a superintendent, and that's where I am now, where I've seen certain things happen in my own classroom. I've seen what happened when I was a principal. I've seen what started to develop statewide with different systems and processes in low-performing schools. I've directly led some of the toughest schools in this country and seen a turnaround. And I always did that in the belief that if I can demonstrate that it can happen in those tight, tough schools where people have forgotten and don't believe in anymore, then it can happen anywhere. And that's why I'm sitting here right now, because I truly believe that Duval County can be a national leader in public education. And I feel that in every role that I've had, although quick, I have a track record of a performance, and I have a group of people that are very important that would not empower me to do that work unless they entrusted me to represent them and deliver. And despite age, despite what's perceived as moving up the ladder quickly. So I sit here in being completely confident that just as I was effective as a teacher, a principal, an assistant superintendent, I will be successful as a superintendent here in Duval. The question that I would ask, I have two questions. One, at the end of the day, with all the indicators in the strategic plan, everything that you think about, everything that's important to you as board members, how do you believe a superintendent should be evaluated? If you had to pick one indicator, how would you determine if that superintendent was effective?
I believe you can't have one without the other, so I'm going to say two. Okay, one of them is obviously there will be outcomes through data, and you have to use those outcomes to see how effective someone is. The second is I believe the climate and culture of the organization speaks volumes about the leadership of the district. So I don't think you can just say one without the other. It has to be both. Because you can get numbers, but if your climate and culture are not matching those numbers, there's a problem. Mm-hmm. So I believe you have to have both. You have to have achievement, which can be viewed in data, but you also have to have a climate and culture where people believe in the numbers, mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. where the students respond back that, yes, my school is this way, where the teachers are going out, instead of creating a blog trashing the district, they're actually creating a blog praising the district, where the parents are your best people, your best PR people, because they're touting your excellence. And nobody wants to leave to go to charter schools or private schools because they know that Duval County Public Schools offers the best rigorous education for their children, and parents want to entrust their children with us. And I think that's how you know you've gotten success.
Dr. Vitti, actually the board has had a lot of discussion about that the last year for a more concrete answer to you. We really moved from a more subjective evaluation system to one that had both quantitative and qualitative aspects to it. Obviously, I think the board would expect, as a team, to move that forward, and that's directly linked to strategic plan. Which would make a lot of sense, and more closely probably mimics what's happening to the teachers in Florida. You're going to be responsible for your data, at least a piece of it. The board never really got to the very end of whether that was 50% or not, and I think that would probably be the next discussion. But I think this board, well, at least the current board, had no interest in each writing a paragraph or two saying how well the superintendent's doing or not doing. We're data-driven. Mm-hmm. And I think if you're not interested in a data-driven organization, we're probably the wrong organization for you.
Mm-hmm. Although I will try, I don't think you could say it any better than Ms. Couch did, candidly. I'd use just a little different words, and that is one, as Phil said, the data. But secondly, the internal and external perception that we really are doing well. Because without the perception, we can really never be successful. Got to have both. Mm-hmm.
Until a few years ago, until Betty and Martha was already here, and that's it. We really weren't that data-driven, and certainly which I've talked about over ad nauseum about our strategic plan, that this is our living will. It's everything and all that we're about, and making sure, and the difficulty is trying to keep up with the state. you know, it's ever changing, and that's the difficulty. You set one goal, and then it's, again, I use that Columbo effect. It's one more thing, and but I don't think you can look at any of these items without this board drives this district, and the superintendent is right there as a coach and as the manager of the district. And if we don't work as a team, doing everything that's in that strategic plan and doing it well, then we failed. And we are spending so much time. I don't think we've finished the superintendent's evaluation part yet. As far as the percentage, have we? For the next, we haven't. We keep talking about which way it's going to go. But for me, again, it goes back to whom the superintendent hires and them carrying out the policy that we set together. And if you don't have the right people in place, that strategic plan is not going to mean anything, because you're not going to accomplish the goals.
That it's very important that the superintendent is trustworthy. And along with that trust comes the ability to be inclusive of all people, all stakeholders, and to use that trust and inclusiveness to drive academic achievement for all children. Mm-hmm. I think that's so critical in the state in terms of Duval as to where we are right now. And so I'm hopeful that at the end of the day, we have a superintendent who also brings a lot of experience. I think it's important for Duval to have someone who is, who's been tried by the fire. I think that we have 125,000 students, and we need to make certain that we have a superintendent who has the ability, the holistic experiences by doing it to ensure that we get to that next level.
Severely criticized by the newspaper because I gave the superintendent, or now superintendent, quote, glowing report. But it was a very subjective evaluation that we had. And so my feelings were different, obviously, than many others. But I do credit Mr. Lee for coming back and saying, you know, it's really nobody's fault. We're not, he put it toward our strategic plan. And that, I think, was the best thing that we've done. And like he said, it's not finished. But the former report was, as I said, very subjective. And I think we're going in the right track. And I also think communication and trust with the stakeholders are very, very important in that evaluation.
Mm-hmm. Next question. The final question, because I know you want to move on, is how do you individually, when a superintendent makes a recommendation and the majority of the board agrees with the recommendation, but there are those in the minority in the vote, if you are in the minority of the vote, how do you handle that situation as board member? So if it's a 4-3 vote on a certain initiative, as one of those board members in the three that are in the dissent, how do you handle that as a board member vis-a-vis the superintendent?
One of the things, Dr. Vitti, is that the board, this board, if you follow anything that this board has done, especially over the past 2 years, when a decision is made, the decision is made. And board members, whether or not you know, because nobody walks lockstep, but if there's an opportunity or if there's some type of concern where board members don't vote for it, we have not had any incident where board members have said no. Now we look for a superintendent who doesn't look for 4-3 votes. Right. Because that's more divisive than anything that can ever be, to say I got my 4, no more. And so that could be very divisive. But I think that if you will just look at the track record of this board, and one of the most dividing factors for this board was the differentiated accountability piece. and this board rallied back together and has worked together. So I don't think that as superintendent, you would have that to worry about. I can't speak for the new members coming on the board, but I can speak for this board.
I think first, and I would hope this is the philosophy going forward, I think it's generally been, I think first, recommendations come to the board with presumption of correctness. This board has been, I think, much more vigilant, particularly in part because of the finances, of requiring a data-based analysis to show that what's being recommended is really the best approach from a really a cost-effectiveness analysis. But I think first, the superintendent's recommendations come with a presumption that we will support them, and generally we do. Secondly, unless there is some extraordinarily critical issue in which there's got to be disagreement, which is what happened with the intervene issue, my experience on this board has been that if one or more of the members feel very, very strongly about something, that we try not to go there, that we try to operate by consensus. And then finally, if there is a minority vote, I know at times members feel like when we take it to public meeting that they need to register their vote. But except with extraordinary exceptions that we've had, at least in one instance, generally no one speaks out. The point being that they support the majority regardless, so whether they agree or don't agree. And so I think it's this board, and I hope the board following will follow those policies, because this board, even in some of the most extreme circumstances, has worked very hard to work as a collegial team. And the superintendent has been very good of recognizing when something is potentially controversial, not pushing the envelope. And so it is a partnership, working together as a collegial body, and I think this board has done an extraordinary job of that in the last 4 years, and we have had some tough issues, as you can imagine.
I think, too, the philosophy that I think we've always had is that every single thing we do is important and can always cause initial challenges, but you've got to get over it, because the next day there's another. I mean, it's never ending. So you've got to have a good philosophy of working together and being able to get in there, vote, and get on with the business of the next day.
Dr. Vitti, I just want to say we move on. We move on to the next issue, next concern, because it's about the students and the community we represent. And I have found, since I've been on the board, not quite 2 years, that the board, we really don't see the board and the superintendent. We see a team. And so that's how we have tried to operate, except Tommy sometimes, but but we move on. But certainly I think it's important that when the superintendent brings whoever the superintendent may be, when that person brings a recommendation, that the superintendent oftentimes get with us individually to talk with us and share with us. And if they bring the right information and we receive the answers that we need to feel that we're able to support it, we don't have issues. But even when we do, if it's not a 7-0, we move on because we're a board and we're a team along with the superintendent.
I agree completely with Ms. Wright. I mean, if you're focused on students, then you move on because they're your priority. I would hope that when there is a 4-3 split, that the superintendent reaches out to the 3 who were in the minority of the vote and works with them to understand their concerns and to try to address those moving forward. But the board, we are focused on students, and I would never doubt that of any of these board members. And we have 4 new ones coming on, but when you're focused on students, you move forward. And like Ms. Barrett said, there's always another challenge the next day. So
like I said, I'm the only one. I pout usually, Dr. Vitti, and then I go on. I know what this body, you know, the thing about it is that there's a bigger issue always than whatever we're voting on at that particular time, and that's about Duval County. Not just of course it's the kids, but you know, what is the legislature going to do to us next? We have a bigger. Do we need race to the top? Do we need to do this? And that's why we have such a collaborative relationship with the unions. That's why we have one with the community, and you're not always going to get what you like, but usually it's someone will speak their mind and move on. As a former legislator, you know, we cast 3,000 or 4,000 votes a year, and you can't be mad at the next person because there's another issue, not tomorrow, but 2 minutes later.
Right.
So you can't be concerned about that. But we have a very collegiate body, and I like what we do and the way we do it. The biggest thing I would suggest for any superintendent, don't lose what Paula said a while ago. If that trust is gone, to me, it's like the soul. It never returns.
Right.
And I don't want to hope that never, ever happens, because if it does, then you're always suspect of whatever the superintendent may do, even your colleagues, but you don't usually experience it on that level.
Well, I know that you're about to make a very difficult decision, and I want to tell you all thank you. And thank you for being transparent. I know that the conversation today may have seemed contentious at times, but those are the kind of conversations that need to happen. And the explanations need to occur, and we can't be afraid to talk openly about issues that may exist with any one of you. And I want you to know that for me, this is about a child-centric process, and having the opportunity to become your superintendent is a long-term investment on your part. I want to be here for the long term. The problems that exist in Duval or anywhere in the country are profound and difficult and challenging, and it's not a 1 or 2 year solution. And some issues are solvable quickly, others need work and sustainability. And to become a national model for urban education, we need to be at this for a while. You need someone with the energy, the character, the integrity to do it the long haul. And I believe that I can give that to you over the long period of time. So thank you, good luck, and I hope to be talking to you again as a superintendent of Duval County Public Schools. Thank you. Feels like 10.